Today I'm going to be speaking about how you can use behaviour modification techniques in order to treat phobias. For this video, I will specifically be referring to a needle phobia as an example. When treating phobias, you can use what's called the method of graded exposure, which basically involves gradually exposing the client to the feared stimulus over time and gradually desensitizing them and reducing that feared response they have to the stimulus. When using the method of graded exposure, you want to create what's called a fear hierarchy, and this fear hierarchy is used as steps in the exposure process. To create the fear hierarchy, you use what's called a SUDS rating system, so that's the subjective units of discomfort scale. Your highest rated item on the fear hierarchy, which would be 100, is the target behavior. So the stimulus that causes the most amount of fear for the client or induces the most amount of anxiety. So in this case, having an injection or a blood test for a needle phobic person is the highest rated item on the list. So your hierarchy of fear needs to have a minimum of 10 stages, although it's recommended to use more stages, and you can use as many as you need in order to reach the target behavior. The steps within the hierarchy should be no more than 10 points apart, and whilst you don't have to follow the items consecutively, it's probably best not to jump around from, say, a fear rating of 5 up to a fear rating of 80. When you're gradually exposing the client to each stage of this fear hierarchy, you want them to be exposed to the stimulus for a minimum of 7 minutes at a time, and you want to do these exposure trials over and over again until the client SUDS rating comes down by about 50%. So if you're creating a hierarchy of fear with a client that has a needle phobia, for example, you want to expose them to lower levels on the hierarchy first. So these items could be things like talking about having a needle or watching another person have a needle. So for someone who has a phobia, even thinking about the stimulus can induce some form of anxiety. So when you're creating the hierarchy, you want to discuss with the client what types of behavior induce the anxiety, and you want to work with them gradually to reach the target behavior. So for someone with a needle phobia, for example, you could have on your hierarchy thinking about needles or having a conversation about needles, role-playing having a needle or a blood test taken, and then watching a video of someone else having a blood test taken. You can also model behavior to your client that has a phobia in order to reassure them that the stimulus isn't going to harm them. So for the case of someone having a needle phobia, you could have them watch you have an injection or a blood test or donate blood. And if you're doing that in a calm way, then they can see physically that you're not having that response, and therefore it's not going to harm them. Most of the time with phobias, clients understand that rationally the stimulus isn't going to harm them, but what they're having is a physiological response that they can't control, and it's unconscious. So the method of graded exposure works with 3 principles. You've got your modeling behavior, which I've already gone through, the classical conditioning, when the person with the conditioned response is repeatedly exposed to the fear-eliciting conditioned stimulus in the absence of the aversive stimulus, the conditioned response will decline and hopefully become extinct, although people with phobias, complete extinction isn't likely, but a decreased fear and anxiety response is likely. And then you've also got your operant conditioning, so negative reinforcement, when the client feels the anxiety reduction and the fear reduction, this works as negative reinforcement for the client. As always, you want to create a safe space for your client. You want to make sure they're not actually in any harm's way, because if they get harmed throughout the process, this could just make the phobia even worse, and then you failed.